Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Just running a little bit late, and looks like we still have some people joining, so I'm just going to give us just a minute or two before we kick off. So apologies, but we'll kick off here in just a moment, everyone. Alrighty, sorry about that, everybody. So we don't have Rob Beckett on. So Chris, I will start with your question. Batch insert entities and restricted async processing are looking to save an entity in a fire and forget fashion, even when flow type does not permit async processing. So Rita, can we just let Chris speak so he can speak to this question more? Chris, if you want to go off mute and help me understand your question a little bit more so I can answer it for you or attempt to.
Sure. The batch insert step, and it has a companion that looks like their primary use case is to basically make the save of a big stream of entities more efficient when you're reading from a file, for example.
Yes.
And so that's a sort of a, oh my gosh, I should have done that last month kind of is my first thought on it. But my second thought is, it seemed what I was finding with it though, if I were to change the automatic batching time, bring it down to maybe like every 15 seconds. One of the behaviors I observed, which I found actually quite handy, is that if I have, for example, what I'm calling a, hey, record a log message into this entity for me, step, flows, which is what it was. If it uses that at that setting, then 15 seconds later, within 15 seconds, that entity does in fact get saved off into the database, as I would hope.
Okay.
Even though I don't do a follow-up thing. So that was, to my mind, good news. But the other piece of that puzzle where I'm thinking of, I have this flow, I'm using it to basically record what are kind of log messages in an entity. It's really kind of what I'm up to here. But the hazard of doing this sort of a thing is that if I use it too many places, it could start to bog down the system, right? Because I could have potentially a dozen different flows calling this same flow to record a message. But they're all going to, and if I do it in the usual serial and in the usual sequential way, all those flows will stop and wait for that entity to finish its save operation before moving on. which to my mind then limits where I use this log out operation. So I'm hoping that, and then I also know some of those spots where I do this are spots where I'm thinking of like a data flow, I believe a data flow, or if not that, I think it's a data flow that does not allow asynchronous processing. So my hope would be that this can thread the needle between giving me some amount of, like a fire and forget, so that I don't have to stop and wait for the save, but that I'm still compatible with these other flows that are kind of restricted on, you can't start doing asynchronous jobs over here, right? Is that making some sense in terms of what I'm trying to do? And
so your hope is to be able to use this step in a data flow to batch up these log message writes?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you should. I honestly, I don't know if it will let you use, if these are considered async or not. Have you gotten that far in testing?
I haven't actually tried it out.
Well, we can quickly confirm if they are.
I've sort of observed there are two types of async. There is some where it's kind of, it'll brazenly say, hey, no, I can tell that's async and that's not allowed. But if it's a flow removed, for example, or I'm not sure what the other conditions are, it might not see it. And so what happens is there's an error in the log that says async processing is not allowed in this context.
Yeah, so async, when it's a blocker, means like usually something that can pause the flow's execution for a time that the workflow engine has no insight into, really. Contrasting that with the other use of the word async, which is run on background thread. Now that should be able to be used anywhere, even though it's called async. So you have that's having a fire and forget subflow fire off in a data flow is supported, so that you can have that be the writer, if you will, for these log events. To me, I mean, the way really for batch insert entities, we do see that used. And I'm just going to get this step up just so people can see it and have some context of what we're talking about. Chris is asking some questions about our batch insert step, which is a step that's a little odd to use. I'm just going to find folder here on the type name or folder state. And in batch insert entities allows us to more elegantly or in a more performant way do large data inserts into the database. And I think there's also the ones you're probably talking about here are auto queue specifically.
Right. Auto queue specifically is the one that struck me as I could abuse this to do a fire and forget. But then I kind of asked the question, okay, that's clearly outside the intended engineering purpose of this step, but am I within the bounds of what it supports, or am I looking for trouble?
I don't know. To me, I would just think usually I would probably the pattern, a more common pattern, which means a more tested pattern, right? In our customer base is just do this in a normal async, like fire and forget subflow. Send your write event to the background thread and let it process it when it's ready to process it. So it gets dumped into the thread jobs queue and worked under normal priority. That ensures you don't get any kind of unexpected contention, as you're hypothesizing you might if you were to use this step. I don't know if anyone's using this in data flows currently. I don't know if it even shows up it may even show up as being an async type step that causes issues when run as a data flow. But I think if you're running a data flow while a form is running and you want to log something off, I would just use an async subflow and a normal write step to do that if I was going to design this. This process I'm imagining in my head right now, to be fair.
So when you discuss it as an async subflow, is that the flow itself is asynchronous?
Yeah, so if we look under flows.
So I mean, in other words, we're not using the go async step.
Correct. It is under flows category is start linked flow async. And this is a subflow that can't return any data because the workflow engine basically launches a background, puts it right into the background, the background thread queue, and then it gets processed when it gets processed. And that queue we can see in thread jobs. So I could show you what this looks like. Let me just, so I'm gonna fabricate a quick test here to show you what this could look like, just so everyone's on the same page. What we're gonna do is spawn off a bunch of processes into the backend thread queue using this async subflow. And this is, I prefer the use of this than the go async step. I like to be very intentional about when I'm specifying async behavior in my flow. And this allows me to have certain points of my flow async, not the flow itself move async, if I want to keep that. So I'm going to just build something that this is going to loop, 20,000 times. It's probably one too many zero. And I'm going to have a subflow here that I'll just create really quickly. And in this subflow, I'm going to put just something so I can look at it, a pause step here. And I'm going to pause this thing for 1 second. So I'm going to compute in future 1 second. Now this is probably going to bring my server to a bit of a, well, it's going to, who knows what the performance impact of this is going to be, but I'm going to run this. And so that flow is going to run and dump a bunch of stuff. It should complete very quickly. It should, so you can see it launched 20,000 records off in 2 seconds. And if I go and I look, I can see system administration, system tools, event viewer. And in here, if I go to thread jobs, what I'll see is a report of all of my queued up bits. And you can see I've got 13, if I look at the bottom here in this very small text, I've got 13,593 jobs queued. Oh, look at that, completed them all, fancy. And so I could run this again. I didn't expect it to run that fast. And my job count should go quite large. This is me, this pause step is equivalent to your write step in your example. And that async subflow is dumping them into the background and saying, run them as quick as you can. There's a background queue you can interact with directly using this async subflow step. And so if you're writing off log events that you don't care about being synchronous, and you don't want those writes to show up to the end user as like a performance penalty or any sort of degradation in the responsiveness of the UI, dumping them on the background thread using this async subflow allows you to both get the data written but not impede the execution of the current thread that the user is running. So this is a pattern that I would say I would advise you to chase down for your use case here, if this makes sense.
I like it. Yes, it does.
So here, number of jobs, and this thing should be so what do we see happen? You could imagine like reading in a giant list of things from a CSV file and then running each one into an async subflow, and it shows up here and it gets worked as it gets worked. So this, and then you can see all of the queues here. We collapse all of these together. This is all the queues available on the server. And then you can usually start interacting with these queues in intelligent ways as your volume of work goes up.
Yeah, I think the more important use case in front of me is that I'm trying to track down people who are complaining that, hey, this is slow, and I have a hunch that these other REST services that I have to interact with are an important piece of that puzzle, but I don't have hard proof. But I also don't want to have, because I know that in some cases there will be an incredible amount of chatter between decisions and those other ones. That sort of struck me as well. If I start recording messages for each round trip, that alone could create trouble. That is what sent me fishing for. Well, how do I do this? There has to be an easy way to let me, record, how long did this take without bogging everything down. That looks like a
I'd call out, I'm not sure if you're using the profiler to identify those hotspots, but that's what I would definitely be looking at the profiler when regularly if users are reporting of performance issues and trying to use this to guide your investigation, because this will show you, it won't show you front end timing, but it will show you back end timings. And this is always running, and you can get a text-based view of what is happening. So here you can see we ran a ton of jobs in the thread job service. We can drive into this and we see, okay, we ran flow 2 many times, and we started an engine, and most of the time here, right? If we look at all of this time, we can see a majority of it was taken in this pause flow step. So now I know I can go look at flow 2 in this pause flow 1 step in flow 2 and figure out what it's doing, and do I need it to do that, and all those other sort of performance troubleshooting questions.
And what is the, so this profiler, is it showing data that's since forever, or what are the?
It's a rolling like 15-minute window.
This is a rolling 15-minute window, okay.
Mm-hmm. But it's always on unless specified to not run.
I need to hassle my administrators. This is definitely worth seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the primary performance troubleshooting tool the product has. So if you don't have access, you should definitely get access. And then this is where you want to start your slowness troubleshooting, performance troubleshooting investigations at.
So the things that stand out of interest are, for example, count in terms of something that's happening a lot. Is there, it says 12 hotspots. What is that trying? Is there some way to figure out decode what's behind the 12?
It must just be saying something. I don't know exactly. It's probably just these top couple that are taking over a second, I'd say, or over 5. I'm not sure exactly what the category for hotspot is, but yeah, I would even pay attention to the tiles. You just want to, this is sourced by the with children total time. And then I prefer the text-based view, but you can just drill in and see what's going on. So, here's a report, designer view 4.0 report that took, was called 20 times. On average, it's fast, right? But the total time, it took almost 2 seconds. But each call, though, or actually that's not it. So we want to go down to here. So documents, we called 3 documents. Anyways, this is, if you're not experienced using this tool, this is where I would advise you. So we can see that here in this report view service, most of the time was in fetching a document. So we would want to go look at why this document is taking so long to fetch, and then work backwards from there to educate us on what design changes we should implement and additional versions to push to production.
And what is that text view you've mentioned?
Yeah, if you click download text view, it'll give you, that's not going to show up, is it?
No.
Let me hold on. Let's see if I can open it really quickly. Just a moment here. No. Properties. This is the text view. Can you see this now?
Yeah.
So I find this to be a much easier thing to read, because you can see here, again, if we look at that same, we can see, all right, thread job service took 522 seconds total, right? We had this, we had almost 81,000 executions. The average time is 6 milliseconds. The max time is 1.2 seconds. And then we start drilling in. So we ran a work job. That means something ran on the background thread. If we drill in more, we can see that background thread was running a flow named flow 2. Starting engine is basically just the engine being executed by flow 2. And then we can see inside of here, all the steps executed ordered by time taken. And we can see all of our time. If we contrast the start step versus the pause flow step, we can see all of our time here. If we look at total time and total time without children is in this pause flow step. So of all the time taken in this series of flows called here, or behaviors, I guess, or actions, all of it's in this pause flow step. And this thing is a wealth of information as you identify oh wait, hold on, like I had a loop here, it ran great in dev, but now in production, it's no longer doing 10 loops, it's doing 10,000. And I'm losing 12 seconds every time I run this to do all those loops and all that kind of stuff that doesn't show up really well till we push things into production. So I'd advise you to get anyone on this call to get really comfortable using the profiler, or to reach out to support and ask for some help with some hands-on training so we can give you guys a hand. But this is the troubleshooting tool for performance that we always go to first.
And that was one of my next lunch and learn questions.
All right, wonderful. All right, so let's go to Josh Vogel now. Can I create a database structure by uploading a CSV? Or if I need something with a couple hundred fields, I need to enter them one by one. If I make a CSV type, it seems I'm forced to keep it CSV, even though I check off the database box. Josh, unless someone else on my end knows better, I do believe you still need to build this manually and do all the mapping to get this created. I'm not very familiar with our create type from CSV action. So if someone on my end is, please speak up. But if I was being asked to do this, then yeah, what I would do is build a simple database structure, and then I would create the fields, and then I would build a flow to map the CSV to the fields to get that flow to import that data.
Yeah, so what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to get records from one database table, not in decisions, to one of the local tables in decisions.
Mm-hmm.
To work around some limitations we're having, not necessarily related to decisions. So I need to create that database structure in the local table to match the setup of the table that we're pulling the records from.
Right.
But, I think maybe I'll just try to work with a smaller subset of the data, so that way I don't have to map out 250 fields. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm not like, how's the data coming in? Like, are you making a database call? Like,
yeah, I was just gonna do a call and then loop through it, until it loads them all in. Unless there's a better way.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you get to that kind of thing, there's just no way, but to move faster on doing all the mapping piece, right? It's just, it kind of gets to be a bit of a trudge to do that much mapping on a single step, but you just kind of have to get in there and do it, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I don't see Rob Beckett on this call, but I'll answer his question for him. I have questions about best practices for cross-team work groups when using decisions as a back-end rules engine to power a product. In our case, we are a healthcare system that wants to present proactive clinical decision support prompts that help clinicians take the right steps to improve patient health. We, product and engineering, are building out our first set of rules, but long-term, we want clinical teams to have the ability to build, test, and implement new rules independently. We know that we need to make sure there is SME approval, but how does decisions recommend establishing some type of steering committee that establishes and ensures best practices in development so that flows are understandable and maintainable over time? Wow, this is a great question. What we do make available to everyone, and if you don't have it, you should reach out to your customer success rep now to get it, is our best practices documentation. And I think really what it means is taking our best practices documentation and then internalizing that and building up your own internal version of it. Decisions is software development, right? But it's done with a no-code tool, but it's still software development. And so there's lots of places where we rely on you as our customer to be able to manage pieces without the tool managing it for you. And an example would be, as soon as you need to get custom code, right? You realize you have a custom data source or a custom step or a custom module. Now, our repository or our import-export services don't deploy custom code on your behalf. So that implies that you've got a mature change control process that allows you to both check out projects from the repo server or import-export projects into production, depending on your the style of license or that you have, the configuration that you have. But it also says that that you also have to push new versions of your custom steps as well. And so in terms of like a committee, I would say the starting point would be starting with our best practices documentation, figuring out what works for your team, and then ensuring that there's regular touch points and reviews. So in the developer world, you'd be doing code reviews. Our professional services team does a version of that. I think they call them code reviews, where more senior members of the team, specifically some of our solutions architect teams, review the work done by the professional services team to ensure that it both meets our best practices. So are there annotations? Is everything laid out well? Are the steps renamed? Is the flow readable? As well as doesn't make bad design decisions where, okay, do we need a nested for each or some other design that is fast in dev but can be problematic when volume data is pushed through it. So yeah, I would say starting with best practices, and then ensuring that gets updated as you experience in the tool continues to be built out, and then establishing a code review type process where work is presented to an appropriately trained committee or small user group for review to ensure that those best practices are maintained. Probably a set of all of those are important to get to do what this customer is asking about. It's a great question. Yeah, Adam, do you mind taking ownership of helping me have a call with that requester so I can understand their request in more detail? I'd like to talk more about that topic.
Yep, will do.
Please and thank you, sir. James Hartzell. Let's go ahead and let James speak if he wants to here, Sabrina. Mr. Hartzell, how goes it? Are you on the West Coast?
Not yet, but I just came to visit. I don't have any questions right now, just listening in.
Any helpful advice for us, sir? Anything you've learned recently that you didn't learn in your time here underneath my terrible tutelage?
I wouldn't go that far, but nothing new in particular.
Well, it's good to know that I've taught you everything you needed to know. So. Sabrina, where are you with my courtesy laugh? James is leaving me hanging here. All right, put him back on mute. He's got no questions. Who else has got questions today? If you guys just want to use the raise hand feature, we can just unmute you and then you can ask your question. You don't need to send it in ahead of time. All right, Alex?
Yeah, hi there. Well, yeah, this is kind of a simple thing that I've been stuck on for a bit, but
Okay.
The basic use cases is that I have an internet page which has got an integration link to a decisions flow.
Okay.
Which basically sends some stuff out, and then at the end of it, I basically want to get this decisions page to close and take them back to the original internet site. And I haven't been able to figure out a way to do that. I mean, effectively what I'm trying to do is, if this were in JavaScript, I would be like running a window.location.replace or .href and that sort of stuff to basically get me back to where I was. But I don't seem to be able to find a way to do that in decisions.
Yeah, this is a little squirrely and it doesn't always work. But let's look at see if we can leverage our end form here.
Yeah, so I've been through end form and it's kind of iffy. Like sometimes it will work and
right.
Sometimes it won't. And so the latest thing that I was onto was using like the open URL. But
okay.
the open URL actually opens a new window. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, is it actually possible to like embed some JavaScript code behind a button?
It is possible, yes, but I don't know that that's, our devs have swore up and down this is something that is just not easy for us to control well, given the way browsers handle security. And so, I mean, it is possible, yes, to have a button click execute JavaScript on your behalf on a form. You can use our JavaScript controls to do that. They can render HTML, do whatever JavaScript can do. You can have a JavaScript control be written to do that. We've used it to do a bunch of clever things for customers, to make a call into a like a auto dialer type utility.
Right.
But so, I mean, are you opening it in a new tab, or are you opening, when you click the intranet link, is the user opening a new tab, or is it navigating their current session?
So no, it doesn't navigate their current session. It opens a new window.
From the intranet site?
No, from the decision site.
Okay, I'm just trying to think. You said that this process starts with the user clicking an intranet link, a site, like a decisions workflow link on a intranet site?
That is the objective, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the flow starts and up comes a window, and that's great. And but when all is said and done, getting out of decisions is problematic.
Let's see here. This is probably going to work, but for reasons that are hidden from me. So I'm just got a form and an in the, I think, Alex, your question here, the other Alex, is end form, END, like a form that ends a user session but allows a process to continue on.
Yeah, I think I've tried like an end form session and an end form.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm trying a regular form with a, no, I think it's actually an end form that has like a button that is to navigate to another URL.
So if I open a new tab here and run this link, it should take me to my form. And then if yeah, that doesn't do anything. So display a message, close dialog or window. That didn't do anything. Try that again. That seems problematic. Main form. And then when I run it again, it's gone because the form's no longer there. Huh. That is actually a problem. Who's technical on this call? Hey, Brandon, can you make a note of this test case for me, please?
Yeah, we're taking a form to an end form session. And then what are we doing here?
If you open it in integration, if you open it in a new tab and then you complete it, and the end form is got closed dialog window as its behavior, when you submit it, oh, that one actually worked a little bit better. It didn't do anything. Yeah, see, I click it, it stays, and I click it again, and then it throws an error because the ID, the form ID is no longer valid here. These IDs are no longer valid. Anyways, we can talk about it later. If you could just take ownership of that for me, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're going through is kind of what we're experiencing. You know, like sometimes I'll close my browser, clear the cache, restart the server, whatever, and for a while it works. And then the behavior becomes kind of unpredictable. So I'm kind of hoping to get somewhere predictable before actually kind of giving it out to user testing.
Yeah, this is the thing that the dev team has swore up and down is not able to be controlled well by us. Historically, whenever we've broached this question with them.
No, I understand that there might be problems with like a window.close type thing, but you should be able to redirect within the same window, because that's like almost like a user action, you know.
Let's see, this is, oh, if on the end form, if we do open, let's see here, what is it? Let's just see if I can take this to Google. Oh, well, setting up that right would help. Yes. All right, so save this and let's run this main form. Well, that didn't do anything at all. Oh, I didn't save it. Let's try that again. Okay, well, that took me to Google.
So that takes you, this is an end-form session with open URL, open
in new window, false.
False. Okay, so basically, okay, I'll have a go with that.
Yeah, this might help out, I guess.
End-form session. Okay.
Yeah, because here I am completing my action and then getting redirected to Google. So I give that a shot, I guess.
Yep. So end-form session, open URL. Great, thank you.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I didn't think I was going to get anything there, so hopefully that works. This is one of the ones that seems like it should be easy, but Dev continuously reports it's not as easy as we think. So I guess I don't understand JS well enough to understand the why there. But all right, let us know.
Okay, will do.
Did we lose you? No, we didn't. Oh, I'm on the, sorry, I was on the panelist list. All right, so let's go to Jimmy. Not a problem I'm running into, but something I'm looking to build soon. How would I have a service watch a folder for a new file and kick off a workflow when the new file is added? Okay, this should probably be easier, but this is pretty straightforward to do. So I am going to build a flow that's going to run on a schedule, and it's going to list the files in a directory. Now, the thing is, the only sort of tricky piece, quote unquote, which isn't tricky once you wrap your head around it a little bit, is we just need to know the last time, what the last file that got touched was, right? So I'm going to say file listener flow is going to be my folder here. All right, so I'm going to build my main flow, which is look for file. So this will be look for file. Now this is going to be run by my scheduled job. So what I'm going to do is just search for list, and I'll find list files in directory. And then here I can give this thing a path. Now I'll go, you won't be able to see it, but I'll go ahead and add a directory on my local here. New folder, which is going to be called CSV home. Right, and then I can finally find a CSV file. There we go. Query one results. Copy. And I'll put that query one results. So if I run this step, and I'm just going to give it a constant here. So this will be CSV home. And I run this, it should show me I have a single file at that path. And then if I look at my outputs here, I can see there's my file on the server's file system, or on a network share my server can access by virtue of the account it's running as. And so then what we need to do is just know what the last file was. Now, this is pretty straightforward, right? So if there's only ever a file, like if there's not multiple versions of the file, then all we can do is check to see if list is empty. So if I look at list is empty and I pass in the list in files, all items as array, what I can do is quickly, oh, actually, no. I don't know. Nope, this is what I want. Sorry, I'm getting myself confused. So if I run this now, is list empty is false. So then on my false path, I can maybe use like a move file step. And I can move this file, and I'm going to move it to, I'll just create another file here called CSV new home. And of course you can't see this because it's on my desktop, but file name will be the first file from my list of files directory step, and I'll move them to their new home, which is CSV new home.
Will that work the same on designer folders? Because we don't have access to our local, it's not a local install.
You can still interact with the hosted server's file system using these steps. Yeah, so you can build directories, like you can create directories. There should be a create directory step. You can build, so create, or maybe it's add directory, add directory. All right, let's look at our steps. Integration, files, list files in directory, rename directory, create directory. So you can build up directory structures in the workflow engine.
Okay.
But here I can move it. So if I run this, it should return false, or it's is empty. Oh, I guess I moved it already. Sorry. Yeah, it's actually in. I moved it. So I looked up, and then all you're doing is basically, building a scheduled job that says run every 15 minutes and run this flow. Find the file. If it's empty, don't do anything. Otherwise, move it and do something else. And going back to the top of the call, probably doing an async subflow to process that file in some way. So run the scheduler and then pawn the processing of that file onto the background thread, and don't constrain or make the scheduled job own the execution of that, assuming it might be some sort of more heavy process.
So if I had that running, say every 5 minutes, 1 minute, would that be a resource heavy process, or is just that quick list rule end? Would that be a resource heavy?
No, not at all. And so in fact, if you imagine it was like this, forms interaction, no, it's not forms, flows, is something like this. Let's assume I've got a bunch of behavior and this is your flow. This is a very common pattern, which would be do a quick check, like that thing will run, and this is a millisecond flow, right? It's not if even, like it's gonna run extremely fast. In fact, the longest time is just gonna be for it to make the OS, the call to list the files. Check it if it's full, if it's end, right, and then run again in 5 minutes. If not, send all the data into the backend thread and then end, and then it'll run again in 5 minutes. Okay. So this is a very common and highly efficient pattern that you can use to create listeners.
That's kind of what I was envisioning, but I like the confirmation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can use the steps to build up the directory structure yourself, even for a hosted server. So you can, if you want to save files to particular locations on the file system, you can. You're just going to have to understand that we can't send that directory structure over with the application manually. Like you could send a support request and say, hey, I need the directory structure at this location copied from dev to prod. And our support team can interact with the ops team to do that for you. Or you could build a flow that builds up the directory structure and make sure that that always gets run as part of your change control or import process. But we can't move the directory structure over as part of our import export service.
Will that structure go if you're using a repo?
Nope, not.
No,
okay. We don't move Windows directories at all as part of that.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So we can either move it manually through support, or you can build a flow that that runs and checks for its existence, and then if it doesn't exist, it creates it. Either one of those two would be your option. Now you can also just use regular folders for this too, like save the file into a decisions folder, then check the folder.
That's probably the route I would end up going.
But instead of using list files in directory, now you're using fetch entities, right? Or some other one of our steps that are entity framework steps, more than likely.
Yeah, that's how I've got it doing right now. I'm moving it there manually and then starting the process manually, and it's finding that file and kicking it off. My next step was to automate it so that I can just put the file in there and forget it, let it run whenever it needs to, and then move on. Cool.
Yeah, that same process though. I'd say keep the execution on the back end and let the check be on the scheduler. Just slightly different steps. So Alex, if the file is added by a form controlled by decisions, can you just add the flow the caller wants right after the form uploaded? Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you don't need to save the file at that point. You just have a form step and your subflow right after it. Like you don't need to save the file. So if we here, let me create a new flow here really quick. So what I'm going to do is build a flow. This flow is going to have a form. On this form, I'm going to add a button and a file upload control. And I'll rename this thing to be new file. And then what I'm going to do is create a subflow right behind it. So I'll find run subflow and I'll select pick or create. And on my subflow, I'm going to click the start step and I'm going to define a piece of file data. So this is named new file and the type here will be file data. And all I'm going to do is show a pop-up with the file name just to show it working. So my subject will be my file name, which would be new file.file name. And my message, I'll just put in some static text just to show this. And then I will go ahead and map new file mapped itself in automatically for me. And then I can go ahead. And so if I debug this, I can run this. I can use select file. I can choose a file. I'll find this profiler file I uploaded and I can submit. And then I should get a pop-up with that file name. So here's me I'm not saving a file to the file system manually in any way. The workflow engine ingests the file from the form and passes it downstream to be interacted with. So hopefully, does that help at all?
Yeah, no, I just was thinking that I wasn't sure whether the caller wanted the file to be uploaded by Decisions or by some other application that just deposited the file. Because if it is uploaded by Decisions, you can do that subflow that he wanted to fire on the same thread.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we see this a lot with like our HL7 engine where like a file gets deposited to a certain location on the file system, and then we listen for that file, build a flow to wait for that file to show up, and then process it. So yeah, assuming you're doing it through the workflow engine, you don't need to save it first and then process it later. You can send it directly for processing. All right, Chris, for a listener, what is the most sensible way to check for a new file every 5 minutes? I would say depending on how you're saving it, given the conversation that Jimmy and I were just having, it'd either be to probably use a list and directory step, or is the file in the directory? I mean, if it's a new file, if the file doesn't get moved and you need to find a new version of the same file, like a check date stamp type file, then you're going to need to create a database structure to hold off like the last time you processed it. And then we see this with like SFTP files. There's a customer of ours who does in the geo mining industry, and they get these files uploaded to an SFTP server, but no one cleans up the SFTP server. And so what they do is they read the list of files and they convert the file names into date times given the format of the file name, and then they figure out what the most recent file is. And if it's what they do is compare it to they have a database table with a single row, and every time they get a new file to process, they save off the file name, and that way they can run this every few minutes, yet only process it when a new file shows up.
Well, I think what I was really driving at with that question was, so you're running this flow every 5 minutes or every 2 minutes. Is that how you structure the schedule, or?
Yeah, exactly.
And then if it's every 2 minutes, I can imagine that you might have an outlier where the flow is taking actually 3 minutes to run. Does this mean we get two flows running concurrently, or does the scheduler mind that.
All scheduled jobs run on a single thread. So a job backing up backs up all other jobs. So you can't get multiple jobs running on the scheduler concurrently.
You can't get multiple jobs or multiple jobs of the same schedule.
So you can control the queue a job runs in if you want to have more control over this. But if we look at our thread jobs, which we saw before, here under event viewer, thread jobs, you'll notice if I collapse all my queues together, there is one for the job service default. Every job, this finds the next job to run and then runs it. And it won't find the next job to run until it's completed with the current job. So it can only run one job at a time. It's a single threaded queue.
So then that would also have the consequence that if one outlier is, for example, taking 3 minutes, the next iteration is just going to end up waiting in the queue.
Exactly. Yep. So you can get into a place where you get these significant backups if you're running at an interval that is longer than the job takes to if the execution time is greater than the interval time, right? You would keep getting this backups would continue to sort of roll, and you'd get really backed up. You can see that if you look at scheduled job log, you'll be able to see this happens. Like, why are my job was supposed to run at 12:30, but it ran at 1:45. Okay, well, look at the job schedule log ahead of it and see what those jobs were taking to run. And then you'll see that, okay, wait, this job was taking 45 minutes and I'm only expecting it to take 10. So then you need to go look at that job, use the profiler and figure out why. But that you do have some more control. If I looked at system jobs and events, scheduled jobs, and I were to add a new schedule flow, you can specify a queue here. So you can have multiple scheduled job queues, and you can create you can create like a priority relationship here. So you could put high interval, high priority jobs in a special queue, and then let sort of regular jobs that aren't priority or that have longer or even variable execution time spans in a separate queue. So you have some more control over this that you can leverage if you're getting a bunch of backups. Another note here is in a cluster, scheduled jobs only do run on one server. So you'll want to keep that in mind as well. Contrasting that with an interval job, which has the ability, if we look here, the tab scheduled jobs versus interval. And these, if we add an interval flow, can be run, excuse me, that's the wrong button, add interval job, can run on the job server or on all servers. So there's some additional flexibility with an interval job. These are more for high frequency jobs.
So this is not what you would use to check a folder every 5 minutes?
You could, sure. That's probably when you get to, it's kind of, I would, if you're asking me which should I do, functionally, they should be the same. Scheduled jobs are older. They've been around longer. And if for me, as from a conservative builder standpoint, I would pick scheduled jobs only based on that. But there are some times where we need to run things. We want to like distribute compute a bit. Like maybe with this example that Jimmy was saying, there's a file, but it's on a network share and there's lots of files that get added. And we want to distribute that load to multiple servers in our cluster. If we have a cluster, interval jobs give you that additional flexibility to run that, to run on multiple servers. But I would say almost always you're just going to use a scheduled job here, and interval jobs are. Did we need to add interval jobs? Probably not, but we're always adding in stuff as soon as people find a need for it, so it's there. But I would if you're running something every 5 minutes, I would use a scheduled job till you figured out a reason to not use a scheduled job.
Well, that brings up the question, what's the interval job for? Right,
and someone had a use case, I don't know what the use case was, to have it, and so we added it to the product. That's just how it that's just how it goes here. But it does open up some additional flexibility, which can be nice when the business requirement, I'm sure we all know how business requirements, go. They're like the government, they only grow, they don't shrink or something. So Yeah, if that need does pop up, you have that flexibility. But I would always defer it to a scheduled job first, because there's no difference between a scheduled job that runs every 5 minutes and an interval job that runs every 5 minutes. Functionally, they're the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Jimmy, I have a filter on my fetch step, so it only looks for files created in the last 5 minutes or so. Yeah, I think the one thing I'd recommend, which probably isn't a big deal, is if is just to think about or put a note on your board for cleaning up the files. If you're over time, you might, we're not going to handle the file cleanup for you automatically. So if you're getting files dumped pretty aggressively and those files could build up over time, you're going to want to think of some cleanup logic. Assuming you don't have that, because there's nothing in the app that'll handle that cleanup for you automatically. You'll need to design that flow or another process, another flow, maybe another scheduled job that runs much less aggressively to grab those files and clean them up, just as a note. All right. This is probably the best lunch and learn I've had so far. I appreciate everyone for joining, except you, James. Just kidding. So anyways, hope everyone had a great time. Let everyone know about Lunch and Learns, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you.